Story 1. The level that doesn't exist. Parking lots are inherently strange, boundary zones, places where time and space seem to lose their usual physical outlines. These are intermediate points where no one should stay for long, but sometimes the architecture of concrete and steel itself begins to distort, turning an ordinary garage into a trap with no exit. On that fateful night, it all started with the most mundane action. I just wanted to pick up my car after an endless day of work that ended well after midnight. The elevators in our office center have always caused me a slight feeling of inexplicable anxiety with their cold metallic clang and sudden unpredictable jerks. But that night, the usual descent to the -3rd floor turned into a surreal journey beyond the usual understanding of reality. A dead, empty silence reigned in the office building when I pressed the bell button, and the booth pulled up noiselessly, as if it had been waiting for me in this darkness for a long time. I pressed the button labeled P3, expecting a short, familiar descent, but instead I felt a sharp, almost physically painful jerk down, from which my stomach jumped into my throat. This was not the usual movement of a serviceable mechanism. It seemed as if the massive steel cables had snapped and the cabin plunged into an endless abyss, one by one breaking through the foundation levels, going deep underground to where there should have been nothing but stone. The digital scoreboard above the doors suddenly flashed with a poisonous, pulsating scarlet light, and the numbers on it began to flash at an insane speed, turning into unreadable symbols and strange signs until the screen froze at the frightening number 13. The doors did not open immediately. They creaked painfully for a long time, as if a huge atmospheric pressure had been accumulating behind them for decades, which was now trying to break out. When the gap finally became wide enough, heavy air poured into the cramped cabin, smelling of stagnant water, old engine oil, and something sweetly metallic, which instantly reminded me of the smell of dried blood. Outside, a space spread out before my eyes that, according to all the laws of physics, could not exist in this modern building. The ceiling went so high into the impenetrable darkness that its outlines were completely lost, and the endless rows of massive concrete columns looked like rows of giant tombstones in some underground necropolis. On each of these columns, the designation P13 was applied with rough, careless strokes of red paint, and this paint looked frighteningly fresh. It slowly flowed down the gray concrete, leaving long, bruise-like traces. I got out of the elevator, and it immediately slammed shut behind me with a deafening sound reminiscent of the slamming of a massive coffin lid. The silence around me was absolute until I took my first tentative step across the oily floor. The echo of my boots did not return immediately, but after several long seconds, and it was strangely distorted, as if someone else, invisible and much heavier, was walking parallel to me somewhere in the depths of this endless concrete maze. My car was found surprisingly quickly, standing alone under the only flashing light in the entire sector, which emitted a nasty, maddening high-frequency squeak.
Around her, endless rows of other cars stretched in all directions, stretching away over the horizon, covered with a thick layer of gray, ash-like dust. It seemed like they had been standing there for ages, with empty interiors, flat tires, and dimmed, foggy headlights. But as soon as I pressed the button on the alarm keychain with a trembling hand, hoping to hear a saving sound, reality was completely and unconditionally disrupted. In response to my signal, it wasn't my car that turned on the headlights, but all the thousands of cars on this level at the same time. It was a blinding, furious flash of white light that cut through the darkness, and immediately after it, the silence exploded with the roar of thousands of powerful engines. Without drivers, without keys in the ignition locks, these huge iron carcasses suddenly came to life, filling the space with acrid blue exhaust smoke and such a powerful vibration that concrete columns began to crack from it. The cars began to move slowly, almost solemnly from their seats, their empty steering wheels turning on their own, directing them in my direction, and creating a narrowing ring of clanking metal and broken glass. In the rear-view mirror of my own car, I saw not my frightened face, but only an empty gray concrete wall, on which a huge, shapeless shadow slowly but inevitably appeared, separating from the ceiling and stretching its thin armature-like limbs towards me.
Story 2: Shadow Under the Wheels. The fog that suddenly covered the city parking lot that night had nothing to do with a common natural phenomenon. It was too dense, too unnaturally white, and completely devoid of any odor other than the subtle, unsettling scent of damp earth. In the outdoor parking lot of the mall, which seemed so familiar and safe during the day, this fog turned the world into a flat, frightening gray landscape in a matter of minutes. I walked to my car with one arm outstretched because the light from the rare sodium lanterns turned into cloudy, useless yellow spots that hung in the void and gave absolutely no visibility. In this strange silence, every sound acquired a frightening, almost painful clarity. First, I heard a strange slapping sound. It was the soft, wet, and rhythmic sound of bare human feet treading on cold asphalt. Slap, slap, slap. I instantly froze in place and the sound stopped immediately. I took a couple more careful steps and the slapping resumed, but now it was coming from under the parked cars themselves. Panic began to rise from my stomach to my throat when I realized that this was not one person, but a multitude of creatures that were moving in perfect sync with me, hiding in the deep shadows under the bottoms of cars. When my old Toyota was only a few meters away, I grabbed a bunch of keys from my pocket in a panic rush. My fingers, numb from some inexplicable cold, let me down, and the keys fell with a soft clink to the wet asphalt, sliding by inertia right under the next massive black SUV. I froze in place, paralyzed by fear, staring at the narrow, dark gap between the car body and the ground. In the thick fog, this gap seemed to be the entrance to some other hostile dimension. I slowly knelt down, feeling the icy moisture instantly soak the fabric of my trousers, and turned on the flashlight on my smartphone with a trembling hand. A bright beam of light cut through the thick darkness under the SUV, and what I saw there instantly deprived me of any ability to breathe. There was no familiar emptiness under the huge car. There, in the cramped space between the asphalt and the rust-covered iron belly of the car, the creature lay motionless. It was frighteningly pale, almost transparent, with skin that was stretched taut over sharp, protruding bones. His incredibly long, spider-like fingers with black claws were firmly embedded in the frame of the car, and his huge, pupilless eyes were fixed directly at me with some kind of hungry curiosity.
The worst part was the realization that this creature was far from alone. When I moved my flashlight to the side in an uncontrollable horror, the narrow beam of light picked out hundreds of exactly the same pale bodies lying under every car in this row as far as the eye could see. They lay there, pressed tightly against the machinery like vile parasites, and their soundlessly moving gray lips seemed to taste the very atmosphere of my growing fear. At the same moment, they all began to slowly extend their thin, bony limbs out from under the cars at the same time. Their joints made a loud, dry crunch, reminiscent of the cracking of dry branches in a winter forest, as they began to turn on their backs, wriggling their entire bodies and furiously scratching the asphalt with their long nails. They didn't try to get to their feet. They continued to crawl on their backs, maintaining their position under the wheels. But now they were purposefully moving towards me, slowly surrounding me from all sides and cutting off my escape routes. I could clearly see the same huge, pale shadow moving under my own car, slowly raising its slender hand to the door handle. The fog thickened even more, completely hiding their approach and leaving me in a tiny, disappearing circle of light from the phone screen, which began to rapidly fade.
Story 3. The Red Sedan. Location number 104 in the deep underground parking lot of my new business-class apartment complex quickly became a source of obsession for me, which destroyed my usual life. At first, this parking lot seemed like the pinnacle of design. Perfect LED lighting, high-resolution cameras on every corner, and 24/7 security. But there was always an old red sedan in my rightful place. It looked like a nightmare come to life, like a piece of rusty iron from the early 80s, with windows that were tinted so thickly that they looked like monolithic pieces of black obsidian. The strangest and most frightening thing was that absolutely no one but me had seen this car at the 104th location. The guards only saw a perfectly clean, empty parking space on their monitors. They walked through this sedan without a shadow of a doubt, feeling absolutely no physical resistance, only laughing at my complaints. But I knew with all my being that he was real. I could clearly feel the sickening smell of rotten apples and stale gasoline that constantly emanated from him. Yesterday, my months-long patience finally snapped. I went down to the parking lot, clutching a heavy steel tire iron, intending at any cost to prove to everyone that this damn pile of metal exists. I resolutely walked up to the red sedan and with all the accumulated rage hit the driver's door with the tool. The metal didn't even bend under my impact, but the very sound of the collision was unbearably strange. It was muffled, wet, and somehow organic, as if I had hit the carcass of a huge dead animal with all my might. At the same moment, there was some kind of chaotic movement inside the car. Something heavy stirred in the back seat, and a small, pale hand suddenly rested on the impenetrable black glass from inside. She left a clear, wet trail on the glass, which began to slowly trickle down in a brown trickle. I froze in place, unable to take my eyes off that bloody print, and it was at that moment that my phone in my pocket started vibrating loudly. My own name appeared on the screen. I pressed the answer button with a trembling finger, and my own voice came out of the speaker, but it was frighteningly distorted. My voice whispered in my ear, breaking into a hoarse cry,
Please, just don't leave. It's very dark and scary here, and they constantly touch me with their cold hands. I beg you, open this door. It hurts me a lot." I slowly looked up from my phone and saw a human silhouette slowly begin to appear behind the dark-tinted glass of the red sedan. It was me. My perfect copy was sitting in the driver's seat, holding a smartphone to his ear. His eyes were filled with inhuman, primal terror. At that very moment, I felt someone's powerful, invisible hands roughly grab my ankles and begin to pull me with great force under the bottom of my own car, which was parked in the next place. I watched in horror as my modern car began to rapidly rust and become covered with red, peeling paint, turning into the same red sedan from the past. The space around me began to shrink with a screech. The walls of the parking lot floated and transformed into cold iron interior panels. I realized with icy clarity that now it was I who would forever sit inside this iron cage, looking at the world through black glass and waiting for the moment when the next unfortunate owner of place number 104 would come to hit the glass with a tire iron in rage. This nightmarish cycle closed forever, and the cold concrete of the underground parking lot became my personal eternal prison, where time no longer mattered, and the only link to reality was my own voice on the phone, forever begging for salvation that would never come. The cold concrete walls of the parking lot continued to keep their silence, hiding thousands of prisoners under layers of time and false purity, whose screams are drowned in the hum of ventilation. Now I'm just another echo in this endless maze. Every morning I watch through the black glass as the sunlight barely touches the entrance, bringing only false hope.